At the brain, just like the bones, you have the frontal lobe. You have a left and a right frontal lobe. Okay. Here is the central sulcus. You know this because it's numbered. Okay. Central sulcus, central sulcus. It separates the frontal lobe from the parietal lobe. Okay. This is the right parietal lobe. This is the left parietal lobe. In the back, can't really tell where the division is, so I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to ask you to do that. But this is the occipital lobe. This is the occipital lobe. Okay, so this is the left occipital lobe. This is the right occipital lobe. Okay, here is the cerebellum. Okay, this would be left hemisphere, right hemisphere. When you look at it from the bottom, oh, I forgot. Okay, this is the lateral sulcus. Lateral sulcus, left lateral sulcus, right lateral sulcus. So right temporal lobe, left temporal lobe. When you look at it from the bottom, okay, here's the pons. Up here is the midbrain. This is the pituitary gland. Going from the pituitary gland up to the hypothalamus is what's called the infundibulum. And I can tag the infundibulum. So this is the infundibulum. Okay. Looking at the brain from the inside, here's the pons. This is the medulla oblongata. This is the medulla oblongata. Okay. When it exits the foramen magnum, it becomes the spinal cord. Okay, up here, this big structure is the corpus callosum. Okay, this region is the thalamus. This is the hypothalamus. It's just this region right here below it. Here's the infundibulum going to the pituitary gland. All right, so here, the white stuff is the arbor vitae of the cerebellum. Okay, so this area would be the third ventricle going down the cerebral aqueduct to the fourth ventricle. Then goes down the central canal to the spinal cord. Looking on the outside here, other things you see, central sulcus. So this is the precentral gyrus, the postcentral gyrus, also known as the primary motor cortex, the primary sensory cortex. Okay. We haven't gone over regions of the brain yet, so it's going to be kind of confusing, but we'll get to it eventually. Okay. And then on this model, other things, we haven't done cranial nerves yet, but the two that you'll need to know just by on the brain, cranial nerve number 1 is the olfactory nerve. Cranial nerve number 2 are the optic nerves. Okay, the optic nerves join right here, what's called the optic chiasma. Okay, that's where the two optic nerves cross. So the stuff you see on from coming into the left eye goes to the right side. Stuff coming in from the right eye goes to the left side. It crosses.
So the nerves are still named for the side of the brain, though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so optic chiasma. And then part of the thalamus here, these little ridges. You see right here, this is called a mammillary body.
A what?
Mammillary body. Looks like two breasts, so they call them mammillary bodies.
That makes sense.
Yeah. All right, that's this brain. This brain, pretty much the same, it's just more detailed. Okay. So first of all, be careful when you pick it up because it likes to fall apart. All right. And you can see the central sulcus. That's what this is, but it's not labeled. Okay. So that's why I like to use that one for pointing that out. Okay, but when you bring it in half, first of all, this comes apart, so don't be frightened by that. The red and blue stuff here is the choroid plexus. This is where cerebral spinal fluid is produced. Okay, remember that this is the thalamus. It's also the third ventricle. Okay, the cerebral aqueduct goes down to the fourth ventricle. Here's the arbor vitae, pons, midbrain is up here, medulla oblongata here. If I tilt it this way, here's olfactory nerve, cranial nerve number 1, optic nerve, cranial nerve number 2, and this model has all of the cranial nerves coming off of it. Okay? Those are the only 2 that you're going to have to be able to tell me what they are. Looking on this side, here's the pituitary gland. The infundibulum connects it to the hypothalamus. Here's a much better view of the fourth ventricle right here. So cerebral aqueduct, fourth ventricle, central canal coming down right here. All right, this is what I'm holding on to. That is the diencephalon. Okay, remember, you get your fist surrounded by brain. That's the diencephalon. Okay, in the diencephalon are the horns. Remember, the ventricles are not structures; they're spaces. Okay, it's what fluid is floating in and getting pumped around through. Okay, so this would be the space for the right lateral ventricle. Okay, this is the right side of the brain. So this is the space for the right lateral ventricle. This is the choroid plexus for the right lateral ventricle. Okay, so this is part of the thalamus. This is the thalamus right here. Okay, and this is the thalamus. Okay, the thalamus isn't a little tiny thing. The thalamus is a big, huge thing. Okay, the lateral wall of this thalamus makes up the lateral wall of the third ventricle. The lateral wall of the left thalamus makes up the wall of the third ventricle on this side. So it's that little tiny space there is the third ventricle. And it gets pumped down through the cerebral aqueduct to the fourth ventricle. So here's your duct. Here's the eye. So this is the thalamus. Just below the thalamus right here is the hypothalamus. Very important region because it's used for controlling so many different things. All right, and that's about it. Oh, well, you can see, okay, so here would be the posterior horn, number 3 on my model here, posterior horn of the right lateral ventricle coming up. And by coming up, I mean going forward. This would be the lateral horn, and then coming up this way would be the anterior horn. So if you look at the picture in your book and then you look at this model, you can see how it is in relation to stuff. Okay. Other things. Okay, white matter. All right, myelinated axons. Gray matter. So you can see that the part that is so important to us, this is where all the reasoning, abstract thoughts, memory is located in just this little bit right here. Okay, that's what we need all the grooves and sulci for to increase surface area. If we didn't have that, we wouldn't have nearly the brain potential that we have. Okay, so this is gray matter. White matter, gray matter. Right. White matter, gray matter. And here, you see this little flat surface. This is called a cerebral peduncle. Peduncle means foot, so it looks like a flat foot. Okay, so arbor vitae, cerebral peduncle. When you put them together, the way they're supposed to be put together, we'll shoot and match together. When you put it together, you see the groove between them, that's the vermis. Okay. Now, there are the meninges. You can't see it on this, but when I get to the chart, you can see what I mean. So here's some of the other things that we've already located. Here's our arbor vitae, fourth ventricle, pons, medulla oblongata. This would be the midbrain up here. There's the pituitary. So this is the hypothalamus. This is the thalamus, corpus callosum.